These are three breakfast habits that millions of people over 60 repeat every single morning, and each one is quietly working against the health of their arteries. This isn't about willpower or knowing better. It's about habits that were built decades ago in a different body that no longer serve the one you have now. If you're over 60, your arteries have already lived through 60 years of wear. They've flexed with every heartbeat, roughly 2.5 billion times by now, and the lining inside them, a paper-thin layer called the endothelium, has slowly become less flexible, less responsive, more vulnerable to damage. That's simply part of aging. But what you eat first thing in the morning can either protect what's left of that flexibility or accelerate its decline. And most people have no idea which one their breakfast is doing. Today we're going to walk through the three most common morning habits that quietly stiffen and inflame the arteries over time, why they matter more after 60 than they did at 30, and, importantly, what to replace them with. This isn't about fear, it's about understanding your own plumbing well enough to take care of it. Let's start with the one almost everyone does without a second thought. Habit 1. Starting the day with refined carbohydrates. Picture a typical breakfast. White toast, a bagel, sweetened cereal, maybe a muffin with coffee. These foods share one thing in common. They're made from refined flour and sugar, which your body breaks down almost instantly into glucose. Here's what most people don't realize. When you eat something that spikes your blood sugar quickly, your body doesn't just deal with a sugar problem, it deals with an artery problem. That sudden flood of glucose into the bloodstream triggers a cascade inside your blood vessels. The endothelium, that delicate inner lining we mentioned, responds to sharp glucose spikes by producing less nitric oxide, a molecule that normally helps blood vessels relax and widen. Less nitric oxide means stiffer, less responsive arteries, even if just temporarily. Do that every single morning for years, and temporary stiffness starts to look a lot more permanent. There's a second layer to this. Rapid glucose spikes also increase oxidative stress, essentially cellular wear and tear, inside the vessel walls. Over time, this contributes to the kind of low-grade inflammation that researchers now believe is one of the central drivers of atherosclerosis, the hardening and narrowing of arteries that raises the risk of heart attack and stroke. Why does this hit differently after 60? Because your body's ability to clear glucose from the blood efficiently, what's often called insulin sensitivity, naturally declines with age. The same bowl of sugary cereal that your body handled reasonably well at 35 creates a bigger, longer-lasting glucose spike at 65. Your arteries are more exposed to the damage, for longer, from the exact same breakfast. The good news is this habit is one of the easiest to shift, and you don't have to give up breakfast as you know it. You just have to change its foundation. Swapping refined carbohydrates for slower digesting options makes an enormous difference. Steel-cut oats instead of instant, a slice of dense whole grain bread instead of white, berries instead of fruit juice, since whole fruit contains fiber that slows sugar absorption dramatically compared to its juiced counterpart. Even something as simple as adding a source of protein or healthy fat, a few walnuts, a spoonful of nut butter, and egg, to a carb-heavy breakfast blunts the glucose spike significantly because protein and fat slow down how quickly your stomach empties into your small intestine. This single change, slowing down how fast sugar hits your bloodstream in the morning, is one of the most protective things you can do for your arteries before you've even left the kitchen. Habit 2. Reaching for processed breakfast meats: bacon, sausage, deli ham on the side. For a lot of people, breakfast doesn't feel complete without some form of processed meat, and it's easy to see why. It's salty, savory, and satisfying in a way that plain eggs sometimes aren't. But processed meats carry two ingredients that are particularly hard on aging arteries: sodium and nitrates. Let's talk about sodium first. As we age, our blood vessels tend to become less efficient at handling excess salt. Higher sodium intake pulls more water into the bloodstream, increasing blood volume and, with it, the pressure your artery walls have to withstand. Over years, that added pressure contributes to arterial stiffening. The vessel walls literally thicken and lose elasticity in response to chronic strain, similar to how a garden hose left under constant high pressure eventually loses its flexibility. And 2 strips of bacon plus a serving of sausage can easily account for a third of your daily recommended sodium intake before 9 a.m. Then there are nitrates and nitrites, preservatives used to keep processed meats pink and shelf-stable. Under certain conditions, particularly high heat like frying bacon until it's crispy, Nitrates can convert into compounds that researchers have studied for their potential role in vascular inflammation and oxidative stress. This is still an active area of research, but the pattern in large population studies is consistent. Higher processed meat consumption correlates with higher rates of cardiovascular disease, independent of overall diet quality. Here's the part that matters most for anyone over 60. Your arteries have a finite capacity to repair the microscopic damage caused by inflammation and oxidative stress, and that repair capacity slows with age. In your 30s, your body might shrug off an inflammatory breakfast. In your 60s and beyond, repair mechanisms are already working overtime just keeping up with normal aging. Adding a daily dose of processed meat is asking an already stretched system to do more with less. This doesn't mean breakfast has to become bland. Lean protein sources, eggs, plain Greek yogurt, smoked salmon, even a modest amount of turkey bacon labeled genuinely low sodium, give you the same savory satisfaction with a fraction of the sodium and none of the nitrate concern. If bacon is a non-negotiable weekend treat, that's a very different pattern than a daily habit, and your arteries will notice the difference between occasional and every morning. Habit 3. Skipping breakfast. Entirely or replacing it with only coffee. This one surprises people because it sounds like the opposite of a bad habit. Isn't skipping breakfast supposed to be good for you? Intermittent fasting has become enormously popular, and for some people, under the right conditions, it can offer real metabolic benefits. But there's an important distinction between a structured, intentional fasting window and the habit we're describing here, which is simply running on empty because breakfast got skipped, followed by 2 or 3 cups of coffee on an empty stomach to compensate. Coffee itself isn't the enemy. Moderate coffee consumption has actually been linked to several cardiovascular benefits in research. The issue is what happens when caffeine hits a completely empty stomach, especially in an aging body. Caffeine causes a temporary spike in blood pressure and heart rate as it stimulates the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. On a full stomach, this effect is blunted. On an empty one, especially first thing in the morning when blood pressure is already naturally rising as part of your body's wake-up process, that caffeine spike stacks directly on top of it. For younger, more elastic arteries, this brief spike is a non-issue. The vessels expand and contract to absorb it without lasting effect. But arteries that have already lost some elasticity respond differently. Repeated morning spikes in blood pressure, especially combined with the natural circadian rise that already happens between 6 and 10 a.m., which is, not coincidentally, the time window when heart attacks and strokes occur most frequently, place cumulative strain on vessel walls that are less able to absorb the shock. There's also a more indirect issue. When breakfast is skipped and replaced with only caffeine, most people compensate later in the day by eating larger, often less balanced meals, or by snacking on quick convenience foods when hunger and low blood sugar catch up with them mid-morning. This creates its own pattern of glucose spikes and inflammatory triggers, layering on top of everything we discussed with habit 1. The fix here isn't necessarily never skip breakfast. It's making sure that if you do have coffee first thing, it isn't standing in for a meal for hours on end. Even something small, a handful of nuts, a hard-boiled egg, a piece of cheese, eaten alongside that first cup of coffee gives your stomach something to work with, blunts the caffeine-driven blood pressure spike, and keeps your blood sugar more stable heading into midday. Bringing it together. None of these 3 habits, refined carbs, processed meats, or caffeine on an empty stomach, are going to cause sudden harm from a single morning. That's not how arterial health works, and that's exactly why these habits are so easy to underestimate. The damage isn't a single dramatic event. It's cumulative. It's the slow, repeated exposure, morning after morning, year after year, that adds up to measurably stiffer, less resilient arteries by the time you're 65, 70, 75. The reassuring flip side is that arteries are remarkably responsive to positive change, even later in life. Research on vascular health consistently shows that dietary improvements can lead to measurable improvements in endothelial function and arterial flexibility within weeks, not years. You are not locked into the consequences of 30 years of white toast and bacon. Your blood vessels are, in a very real sense, still listening to what you feed them. So here's what a genuinely artery-friendly breakfast looks like in practice. Start with something that has fiber and protein as its foundation, not refined starch. Steel-cut oats with berries and a spoonful of ground flaxseed, or eggs with vegetables, or plain yogurt with nuts and fruit. If you want something savory and meat-based, choose leaner, lower-sodium proteins over processed options, and treat bacon and sausage as an occasional food rather than a daily one. And if coffee is part of your morning no matter what, pair it with something to eat, even something small, rather than letting it stand alone. None of this requires giving up flavor or comfort or the parts of breakfast you genuinely enjoy. It requires understanding that your arteries are listening to these choices every single morning and giving them ingredients that support flexibility and calm rather than spikes and strain. You've taken care of your heart for 60 plus years without even knowing exactly how. Now you know a little more about what's happening under the hood. And that knowledge is the first ingredient in any breakfast that actually protects you. As always, if you have existing heart or vascular conditions, or you're on blood pressure or blood sugar medication, talk to your doctor before making major changes to your diet. Some of these swaps interact with medications in ways that are worth reviewing together. Take care of those arteries. They've been working for you since before you can remember.